The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's University of Louisiana System Budget Briefing webinar. My name is Jackie Tisdale. I'm the Communications Director at the UL System, and I'll be moderating our Q&A discussion today. Before we get into the Q&A, just a quick reminder, if you haven't joined us before, that the webinars are pretty set at 30 minutes in length. This does usually include a presentation and Q&A. All microphones are muted except for our speakers. You can use the question and chat module to submit your questions. Those come directly to me. They're not seen by other attendees, and then I will address those questions to our panelists. The webinar is being recorded and will be archived at ulsystem.edu/webinar. Now, before we get into our Q&A session, just wanted a quick review of the past webinars. Every week since March 6th, we have had focused presentations on various topics to just do a bank of information leading up into session. Now that session has started, these weekly webinars moving forward are going to be an opportunity to just update you on things that have happened and be able to answer the questions that you may have. Just so you know, we've had over 400 attendees on these webinars, ranging from faculty, staff, students, alumni, some Board of Regents members, some reporters, and the most of you in our surveys after the webinars have reported that these have been helpful. Now, today's focus, if you joined us last Friday, we were interrupted at the end with a fire alarm. Everything was fine. We did have to evacuate the building, but we did get through that presentation on a review of the legislative bills. We just weren't able to get to the question and answer session. So today's webinar is going to be strictly focused on trying to answer your questions. And before we get to that, just wanted to give our panelists, and specifically Rachel Kincaid, our Vice President for External Affairs, the opportunity to update you about what has happened in session over the past week. So, Rachel?
Thank you, Jackie. So we have completed the first week of session, and there's been a lot that's going on. And so just a few things to report on some of the bills that have made it through a couple of the committees. There's been a lot of press about the discussion on the inventory tax and a consideration of a repeal. There was a bill that went through Senate Finance on Thursday, Senator Adley's SB 177. So you've probably seen a lot of press on that, and essentially there is some consideration that that particular bill will create a source of offset that perhaps the Ways and Means Committee could look at to either add some revenue in the form of a cigarette tax or other taxes, or also adjust some of the levels of funding in a multitude of taxes and credits that you've seen discussed in the press. So that did make it out of committee on Thursday and out of Senate Finance, and now House Ways and Means has scheduled a multitude of bills to be heard on Monday and Tuesday that will include a discussion of motion picture, an increase in the cigarette tax, solar credits, and a variety of other things. There's been a few bills that have been added, and certainly they'll be continuing to do that through the weekend. On the House Education Committee, House Bill 66 by Representative Carmody, House Bill 168, and House Bill 152. All of those bills relate to tuition autonomy or either fee authority. Representative Broadwater, as well as Chair Carter, also have some bills that relate to tuition authority with respect to graduate tuition, as well as fee authority, and as well as just tuition and fee authority overall. They're related to statute as opposed to a constitutional amendment. There are a multitude of bills related to tuition and fee authority. But those three in particular are specific to statutory authority, which means that the management boards would have some flexibility in assisting the campuses with that should they wish to exercise that authority. The authority could mean they would be able to increase fees but also reduce fees. There is some interest in some campuses that would like to adjust either the out-of-state tuition or some other fees that perhaps could be more helpful to students. There's also a provision in each of those bills that 5% would be set aside of the new fees or new increases to address financial needs for students who have more of a need for assistance. The other bill that specifically related to higher education was House Bill 776, which essentially is, by Representative Adams, is a rewrite of GRAD Act 2. GRAD Act 2 is essentially an autonomy bill that has included a variety of flexibilities for campuses and autonomies. And so this bill actually opens up all authorities that were in GRAD Act 2 available to all institutions. The prior version of the bill limited the majority of those autonomies to just certain institutions meeting certain levels. So this allows flexibility for every campus in the state, as well as adding several other provisions. So that bill will probably go to the floor next week. The other three related to authority are yet to be scheduled and could be scheduled next week or could be returned to the calendar and then reconsidered. So those are the major education bills that went through this week. So,
thank you, Rachel. And I apologize, I failed to introduce who our panelists are today who are here to answer your questions. Of course, we have University of Louisiana System, Dr. Sandra Woodley, and UL System Vice President of External Affairs, Rachel Kincaid, who is our legislative liaison. So at this point, I'm going to start addressing questions to our panelists. We do have a bank of questions that have been received in past webinars that we may have run out of time to be able to get to. So we are using those today and additional questions of any attendees right now that you submit. So with our first question is, can you speak a bit more about tuition and fee increase proposals and swap out of funds?
Yes, this is Sandy Woodley. The tuition and fee proposals, as Rachel just mentioned, run the gamut among fees that proposals that would allow you flexibility on the graduate, on non-resident, on undergraduate. Some of them are tuition related, some of them are specifically fee related. And I think part of the challenge that we all know about is the change in source of funds to the institutions from state appropriations to tuition and fees has caused a situation at many of our institutions where affordability is a growing concern. And so part of the challenge is advocating for additional flexibility in tuition and fees, but not necessarily using that authority right away. I think for some of our institutions it's important, for all of our institutions, it's important to have long-term flexibility, and that's really what the proposals are for. But I think as far as the significant increases in tuition and fees in the short term in some of our institutions, that won't be the case. So I think we have to be very careful and judicious with any authority that we're given by the legislature. The important part is that the flexibility would allow us not to have to go through a 2/3 vote of the legislature if you needed flexibility in the future. I think that's really important. For us, I think affordability is a concern for most of our institutions. And as Rachel mentioned earlier, some of the proposals do allow you to lower the rates in areas where now you're required to be much higher, like a non-resident tuition rate being at the Southern Regional Education Board average. In some of those cases, institutions are required to publish a price that is much higher than market, and you're losing students who would come to our institutions. So we need the ability to lower in some cases and flexibility in the future. The swapping out of funds with tuition over time has been a very difficult problem for our institution. As you know, even with the increases, 80% increase in tuition over the past 8 years, we're still $90 million down in total funding, operational funding at our institutions. And so trying to manage the flexibility but also stop the swap of tuition dollars in the future is a high priority for our system.
Well, and I just wanted to add to Dr. Woodley's comments. I know that concerning tuition and fees, Senator Donahue as well as Senator Appel also have a bill related to TOPS. And so the companion to that is also the Senate version of SB 155 by Senator Donahue that would allow flexibility for tuition On the Senate side, it is a companion to the TOPS bill, and so that both of those bills made it out of committee and will probably be scheduled on the floor next week as well. So we have instruments on both sides concerning tuition and fees. However, the one on the Senate side is dependent on the passage of the TOPS bill.
The next question is if relief does not occur or does not significantly help in reducing cuts, will some universities closed or be forced to all but close? And a related question is the UL system discussing any plans for exigency as the LSU system is doing?
Well, again, it will certainly depend on the severity of the cuts, what the situation will be for each one of our institutions. We have 9 institutions in our system, and each one of our institutions has a unique circumstance, both financially and mission-oriented. And so I think what we've done at the University of Louisiana system, and I think this is true at the LSU system, is we've begun to look at our policies and our procedures to make sure that whatever the scenario rolls in the summer, that our institutions and our presidents of our institutions will have as much flexibility as possible to keep the institution as strong as possible. So it's too early to tell, the extent of the damage based on what the cuts will be, but I think the institutions have to be as prepared as possible to do that. There's no question that if we have an 82% cut in appropriations, that it will be severe consequences across the board. Whether or not an institution has to close or all but close, I think we'll have to work through those details when they do roll in. I don't anticipate any of our institutions closing, and we certainly are going to do everything we can to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Okay. Next question is, will there be early retirement incentives offered to non-faculty at universities as a means to reduce budgets?
We're working really hard, as I said earlier, to make sure that the presidents have a menu of options available to them, so that they have every reasonable tool at their disposal to be able to manage their own particular situation. So it won't be a one-size-fits-all. The institutions will be crafting their plans, and they're already starting to look at their planning processes, and so that they'll be ready in the summer. But they'll have each institution will have their own unique approach depending on the situation on the ground. So it is possible that you'll see some early retirement incentives offered, but that will be determined by each president based on the facts as we know them in the summer.
All right. Our next question is, some seem to see privatization as a positive, progressive move to dealing with budgetary challenges. What do you think that this could possibly look like in higher education?
Well, on a continuum between public and private, Louisiana's institutions are already pretty close to the private mark. Certainly closer to private than they are public, just by nature of the percentage of our dollars that come from the state. So I think we've already found a great deal of efficiencies related to a privatization, because we've had to do that based on the budget situation. I also think that in a state like Louisiana, with as high a population of citizens who badly need an education, and with an income profile that's on the low end, it's important to make sure that we have investment in higher education that's public. We've already looked at challenges with decreases in enrollment based on I think based on the increases that we've had to make in tuition and fees. So I think there already is some evidence that we're pricing students out of our institutions, and I think it's really important to have public investment so that we don't do that. The other challenge that we have in Louisiana, and of course this relates to a lot of the other bills on autonomies that you'll see in the legislature, is even though we have a relatively low amount of funds from the state, we have a very high amount of regulation from the state, and also a lot of restrictions in the institution's ability to manage their own operations, like procurement and contracting and things of that nature. And so I think that's a theme of this session, is trying to make sure that we have as much flexibility as we can, given how private we become, But I think it's also a great push to make sure that we don't become privatized, because I don't believe that the number of citizens in Louisiana can participate in higher education if we are truly private. Only the relatively wealthy will be able to participate, and that's something that I think would hurt Louisiana's economy and Louisiana's standard of living in the future.
Dr. Woodley, we have a follow-up question to the financial exigency question. Wanting specific information if individual universities in our system are having their own conversations about declaring financial exigency.
Well, all of our institutions are having conversations about many different scenarios, and I think that's what we expect our presidents and the leadership at our institutions to do. I mean, you know, the governor's budget without any sort of contingency shows an 83%, 82% cut in our budget. So good financial practice and sound financial management would require that all of our institutions are having detailed conversations about a multitude of different options that they will have to address depending on the severity of the cuts. So we've met with our provost, we've met with our presidents, we've made sure that we've looked at our policies and that they're sound and that all the tools that are necessary are available to the institutions. And we do expect our institutions to be having these conversations. Now, we haven't put specific plans or asked the institutions to put specific plans together based on the worst case scenario, because we don't feel that that's constructive at this point. We just want the conversations and the planning to begin, and we want to spend most of our time and focus on trying to prevent the cuts.
Thank you. I want to remind our audience that if you have a question that you want Dr. Woodley or Rachel to address, please submit that in your question chat window. Our next question is, what legislative bills have the best opportunity of passing with any real help or relief to propose cuts to higher education?
Well, I'll let Rachel talk about the specifics, but generally speaking, you know, they fall into a number of categories. You know, there are proposals out there that deal with either repealing taxes that would free up money that's currently being paid out, or tax exemptions that do the same. There also are a number of bills that do increase tax revenue from sources like cigarettes, taxes, and other things like that. You know, there has to be some revenue measure that will provide relief. I think that in the end, it's probably going to be more than one thing that will handle the situation. There's probably going to be a multitude of bills that have to fit together to make sure that higher education gets the funding that it needs, but also the other needs of the state, like health care and local governments. We are working very hard to make sure that we're not at odds with the business industry. We think that we can find a proposal that provides relief to everyone and doesn't hurt any you know, sector tremendously, so that, you know, we can all get what we need for next session. So Rachel, you may have specifics that.
Sure. And so just to add to, that's really, just to add to our comments, is you will see a multitude of vehicles that will be helpful to higher ed. So there really are in kind of two buckets, as Dr. Woodley mentioned. So specifically related to taxes and credits and an evaluation or reduction or change in those policies, but also that are specific to higher ed with respect to some of the flexibility that we discussed. So specifically, Representative Adams' bill that would allow some flexibility on autonomies with respect to the GRAD Act. Senator Donahue's bill with respect to setting the level of TOPS funding to the 2015 level. Part of the challenges with an increase in tuition fees, it also creates an increase in the cost of TOPS, and so it just creates a situation where it's an escalating cost and then a declining revenue. So also the bills that we talked about with respect to tuition authority, fee authority, flexibility on graduate tuition that Senator Donahue, Representative Broadwater, Representative Carter, Representative Carmody have, and there's several other bills that are out there related to that, but those are ones that have come through. Representative Leger also has a bill that would dedicate the economic damages of the Deepwater Horizon, specifically to higher ed. That could potentially be a very large pot of money. That will be heard Monday on House Appropriations, and Dr. Woodley will be present and testifying in support of that or offering information with respect to how that will affect the universities. Also, there's a lot of discussion about dedication of possible internet tax to higher ed, or at least having it go into the state general fund and aligning some of Louisiana's laws with the federal law. So once the enabling legislation at the federal level happens, Louisiana will be able to take advantage of that. In addition to that, there are kind of several different things that members are considering as possibly offsets, as Dr. Woodley mentioned. You saw, as we mentioned, Senator Adley's bill 177, the repeal of the inventory tax, kind of creates a vehicle in some ways that meets Governor Jindal's requirements for a tax-neutral plan. So very quickly in Ways and Means, you're going to be seeing a lot of bills that possibly could be part of that offset. So specifically, there are 132 bills that really are in different taxes or credits that have been mentioned as possible solutions for budgetary issues in the state, and of which could be dedicated to the state general fund or specifically to higher ed or health care or a variety of other sources to resolve those issues. So the bills that really have the most bills filed and are most likely to have some type of change in current policy are the motion picture tax credit, which right now in FY15 the Department of Revenue is projected to be $300 million. There are 20 bills that have been filed that would affect that. The wind and solar energy credit, which is projected in FY15 at $39 million. There are 10 bills that have been filed with respect to that. The enterprise zone program credit at $52 million. 10 bills have been filed with respect to that program. The excess federal itemized deduction on the individual income tax also has 11 bills filed, and that is $358 million in credits every year. The quality jobs program has $52 million. The horizontal wells exemption has several bills filed on that, including one from Senator Adley, which is $236 million. The net operating loss, which is essentially a change in the corporate income tax, that's a $330 million credit, and there are 7 bills related to that. There are 30 bills that are related to across-the-board suspensions of all taxes, of all credits, at varying levels, some 20%, some less. Essentially, that's $1.4 billion in estimation from the Department of Revenue. But depending on what that level of reduction or scale would be, and who's included and who would not be included, those certainly could be a varying number. The inventory tax credit, there are still 14 bills that have been filed related to that, but it does seem that Senator Adley's bill will probably most likely be the vehicle. So those are just some of the top ones. There will be a cigarette tax that will be on the agenda Monday for House Ways and Means. All of these bills have to start out in Ways and Means. So that bill, as filed by Representative Ritchie, would increase the current tax by roughly $1 and would generate $250 million in the second year. However, that is just one of many vehicles. There's some discussion about passing another one that perhaps would be a lower rate or $100 million. So there are going to be many things that line up to be part of the overall issue with respect to the budget, because not only higher education but health care and other things are part of the shortfall that also have to be addressed.
I have 2 questions I'm going to try to collapse together because they're related. Do you have any advice for faculty members who want to be involved in campus budget planning discussions, how they can provide input? And coupled with that, regarding possible program review of closing of majors or units, is there a floor such as costs or numbers involved for deciding what programs or departments get closed, or is it strictly a case-by-case by each program unit? What types of approaches are being discussed?
Well, the process for looking at programs, for example, on the program discontinuance on any of our policies, do require that the institutions receive faculty input, and of course we certainly do want to continue that. Making sure that the proposals are evidence-based, that you look at the data and make a a very thoughtful decision about the numbers. Obviously, when you're looking at a steep budget reduction, the amount of money that the institution has to recover has to be a factor, because that would be the reason to have to look at that. I think it's also really important for faculty to be involved with their administration in looking at what are the priorities, collectively together, looking at what are the priorities of that particular institution. You know, strategic priorities, we don't want to lose those. We want to make sure, and inevitably, if the budget cuts are more severe than we hope, then certainly there are going to be some good programs that won't be able to stay at the institutions. That's a really unfortunate downside of severe budget cuts. There will be some good things that we will no longer be able to afford to do if the overall institutions are going to survive and become stronger once the money does begin to flow back. And as I said earlier, I think the institutions and the faculty and all the stakeholders at each one of the institutions, you know, they need to track on these issues and be involved, particularly as we go through the process. And I think it's also true that we need to spend as much time as possible working with our friends in the legislature and those who can actually avoid this from happening, prevent this from happening. I think that's really important for us to do. But the program discontinuance and the policies that we have in place to review programs, you know, those have been around for a while. Many of our institutions have had to go through some version of scale back in the past several years based on the cuts that have already rolled in. And I think collectively having conversations about strategic priorities. And I would also say that I think it's important for faculty to understand the particular budget situation at each institution, and as you're doing now, if you're on this call, getting an understanding of the overall fiscal climate and what that might mean to your institution. I think it's important to be plugged into those and to understand the bigger picture and also the micro picture for your particular area of expertise or your discipline or your program.
Dr. Woodley, we only have a few minutes left. I do have a couple of questions in the queue. I'm about to ask this, might be our last one. I want to make sure the audience knows that if you've submitted a question, we don't have a chance to get to it. We will roll it over to our next webinar Q&A session. So this is a pretty powerful question, Dr. Woodley. It says, it seems like the higher education crisis will have ripple effects into other areas of Louisiana's economy. For instance, I'm a tenured faculty member, tenure track faculty member, and I've been leery about making major purchases like buying a home, a new car, or even minor purchases such as dining out because I'm not sure what's going to happen to my job or salary. Can you speak more about some of the potential effects a higher education collapse will have on our state?
Well, you know, higher education is economic development, and what a tragedy it would be if we have all this economic development and job growth and jobs in the state and our own citizens are unable to participate. And so we are deeply concerned about that as well. And I think we have to be able to reverse this trend so that we don't lose our ground in economic development. But I do deeply sympathize with the position of people who are working for our institution in whatever capacity that have to make life decisions every day with so much uncertainty. The uncertainty is one of the worst things about this crisis, the not knowing what the end result is going to be and how quickly things are going to have to change depending on the severity of the cuts. And so I deeply regret that we find ourselves in this uncertain situation. So I think there are ripple effects beyond that as well to real families and real people who are trying to contribute to Louisiana in a way that we badly need them to contribute. I would just like to reiterate that from the system office perspective, me personally and the teams that are at the institutions, I think we care very much about these issues and we care about the real people that these issues affect. And it is our goal to do everything we can to keep our institution strong. We're doing everything we can from a public advocacy and a political avenue to make sure that these cuts don't happen. And in fact, that Louisiana begins to reinvest in higher education. One of the most important things that we can do beyond the immediate concern that's eating up a lot of our energy and should is who's going to be our next governor and what can we do right now to put assurances in place that whomever is going to be our next governor considers higher education a priority and also connects higher education to the economic development of Louisiana. And so we'll work hard on all of those fronts. I greatly appreciate the stress that everyone is under, and I would ask that everyone continue to stay informed and track, and also to do what you can. You all have legislators in your district. You have people that you can reach out to. I think reaching out and letting them know that higher education is a priority is important for you to do at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Woodley, and that's all the time we have today. I want to thank everyone for your questions, and again remind you if you have some questions in the queue we weren't able to get to, we will roll those over to our next webinar, which will be next Friday, May 1st. Please remember to register for that and share the link, ulsystem.edu/webinar with your friends and family, and make sure that we're getting the word out. Have a great Friday.